remember when I was a young minister, somebody who was taking Old Testament history said, Joe, did you know that the Jewish males back in the time of the Old Testament were not allowed to read the Song of Solomon until they were at least 30 years old? No, I never did look that up to see if that's true or not, but I read it that night. Like, what's in there? It is a book about love. It is a book about sex. And I want to show you in this book, in this episode, some things about sex that may be shocking to you. And we're going to talk about them, what I call Solomon sex, the kind of sex that Solomon had with this particular woman, this particular bride. Now, you know that he had hundreds of wives and concubines, but this particular one, there's this romantic story that's called the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon. That's this beautiful poetry, and it is a highly sexual book. Now, you might say, wait a minute, I read that one time, and I didn't see a whole lot of sex in it. Well, understand that idioms change. And if I'm going to be able to teach you about Solomon's sex, and one of the things in this episode is that I ended the last episode of the Dr. Joe Show by saying that there are some Christians who believe that oral sex is a sin. As a matter of fact, maybe people of other religions as well, but I'm talking primarily about Christians here who believe that oral sex is a sin. And I'm going to show you in the Song of Solomon that they actually had oral sex. Now, quite a challenge, huh? Right at this point, you're saying, there's no way, it's not in there, I would have seen it. Well, we're going to go through, not every verse, but we're going to go through several verses in the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon and understand that idioms about sex change. You say, what do you mean? Well, if you think about the various idioms, the various slang words, if you will, that we in the United States of America would use to refer to a woman's breast, how many could you think of? And they go on and give me all kinds of names, all kinds of things that people, I don't need to go through them all here because some of them you might find particularly offensive. And interestingly, I don't use many of those slang words to refer to a woman's breast. You say, really? You don't? I really don't. You say, why not? Because I think a woman's breasts are much too beautiful, much too important to be referred to in some slang language. Let's suppose that a couple of thousand years go by and somebody finds a letter, some archaeologist, that a man in our day and time wrote to his wife about how that he can't wait to come home to make love to her. And he says something like, I want to caress your... And the anthropologist might look at that and go, apparently, they had owls. Because he may have used the idiom hooters. In our day and time, we would understand what he's talking about. 2,000 years from now, they'd be going, I don't know what he means. Well, that's some of the difficulty that we have with the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon. I mean, this is an old document. And some of the language that they would use then, which would be the idiom of their day, that they would hear to be very explicit and often very beautiful. We read and don't get it at all. So let me just set the stage. I'm going to read a few verses right off the first chapter, you will. She, the bride here, in chapter 1 of the Song of Solomon, in verses 5 and 6, she gives us a little bit of introductory information about herself. She says, I am very dark, but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me because I'm dark, because the sun has looked upon me. Now, we look at that and go, well, what exactly does that mean? I guess it could mean that she was one of these people that loved to get out in the sun and get a good tan. Although I'm not thinking that a woman in that day and time laying out in the sun would have as much skin exposed as we definitely would in our day and time. I remember reading in the Reader's Digest years ago It said it used to be that a woman's bathing suit would go down to her ankles, then later down to her knees, then later down to her thighs. And this year, we're not sure she's going to wear it down to the beach. Because styles change, the idea of what is modest changes, so forth and so on. And so a woman lying out in the sun today is probably in some kind of a bikini, and it could be, based on what you see on the beach these days, a very teeny tiny bikini. And I just can't picture a woman back in Solomon's day laying out in the sun, or lying out in the sun, if that's the right word, dressed like that. So while it might be referring to the fact that she has a good tan, doesn't seem to fit the context to me. But we also know that a lot of the women that Solomon married were from different kingdoms. 700 wives, 300 concubines. That's 1,000 women. A concubine was similar to a wife, not quite the same, but similar to the wife. And we know, because we've read the Old Testament, that the motivation Solomon had in marrying all those women was not because of the fact that he wanted to have 1,000 women in his harem, but because of the fact that he wasn't a warrior. His dad was. His dad, David, was quite the warrior. Not Solomon. Now, Solomon had been given a gift, but that gift was wisdom, which sometimes he used brilliantly, and sometimes he didn't use it all. But one of the things he would do so that Israel would not have to go to war against certain nations is he would marry the king's daughter from that particular country, whether he was called the king, the emir, whatever the titles were back in those days. And he would marry these women. He's marrying these princesses. And so now all these guys out here in these other kingdoms are his father-in-law, and therefore less likely to invade, which was a good thing for Solomon because he wasn't a warrior. And so if he's marrying these women from so many different countries, trying to make sure that he has set up all these things to where his country can prosper. And obviously, if he's got relationships with that many different countries, he's not just putting off warfare, hoping that it won't occur, but I'm quite sure then it would be setting up trade so that this country could interact with that. And now economically, his country could grow, which was important to Solomon because he spent a lot of money. As a matter of fact, to the point where even with all these trade relationships, he taxed his own people pretty highly to do all the things he wanted to do, like to build the Temple of Solomon, which, based on the biblical description, was somewhat amazing. And so when I read this, and she says, I'm very dark. As a matter of fact, that's the word. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. I am very dark, but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon, do not gaze at me because I'm dark, because the sun has looked upon me. You might say, well, there you go, Dr. Beam. You missed that earlier, didn't you? Obviously, she's talking about having a suntan. Hasn't it been fairly well accepted that people from parts of the world that had more and more and more exposure to the sun, that part of the reason that their skins are darker is because of the effect of this long-term sun exposure, not just to them, but to their ancestors and the ancestors before them. And so saying, yeah, this kind of happened to us because of the sun, that wouldn't be unusual at all. And so when I read this, I think this woman is a black woman, probably from some part of Africa. Maybe from one of the Arabic nations where the skin's a little bit darker, but she says, I'm dark. I'm very dark, but I'm still pretty. Now, we're not going to read every verse in the Song of Songs. I just don't have time to do that. And so still in that same chapter, chapter 1, we can look at verses 10, 15, and 16. So if you want to take your Bible and open it up to whatever translation you're using, whether it's the King James Version, the New International Version, whatever it might be, you can look in the translation you use most. But look at these verses. I'm going to read from verse 10, verse 15, and verse 16. And all through this, I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version, which I have come to like quite a bit. So in verse 10, he says to her, "Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of jewels." Now, we're getting a hint right off the bat that this woman knows how to dress. that her cheeks, that she has made them more attractive. Ornaments might be something off of her head that touches her cheeks. It might be something she's rubbed into her cheeks. And then he says, and you're wearing these jewels around your neck. This woman knew how to make herself very attractive. You see, part of our sexual attraction to another person has to do with their appearance. Part of it is based on what we see, part is based on what we hear, part is based on what we smell, like colognes and perfumes and etc. Part's based on what we touch. If you look at the five senses, when you go through those five senses of what you see, what you smell, what you touch, what you hear, what you taste, that as you go through those, each of those can make another person more attractive. And apparently she knew how to do that. And then in verse 15, he says to her, "Behold, you are beautiful, my love. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves." I don't know what parts of a female anatomy might attract your attention if you first see her. I admit, eyes are a strong attraction to me. There's some eyes that are just unbelievably attractive and become actually a pull toward that person in the sense of, look at those eyes, how beautifully they are, or the color that they are, the shape they are, or the fact that there seems to be this brilliance behind these eyes, et cetera, et cetera. And so he talks about her eyes, and I wouldn't doubt that she put some makeup on those as well to make them more attractive. And so she, as he's talking about how pretty she is, as he is talking about how pretty she is, she replies in verse 16, "Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved. Truly delightful." Now, you might be saying, well, I don't know if any of this is going to apply to me because I'm not gorgeous. I'm not a gorgeous female, or I'm not a gorgeous male. But don't you understand that what's happening here is because of the deep emotional bond they have with each other, they're seeing the beauty. They're seeing the physical beauty. Now, my guess is that she really was quite stunning physically, and my guess is Solomon was the same. But once you get to a certain level of love with another person, everything about that person becomes beautiful to you as long as you love them like that. And so in chapter 4, now I'm going to be skipping around in the Song of Solomon. In chapter 4, verses 1 through 9, I want you to read there, if you will. So flip over to chapter 4 if you've got your Bible with you. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 9, read how he describes her beauty. "Behold, you're beautiful, my love. Behold, you're beautiful. Your eyes are doves behind your veil. Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping down the slopes of Gilead." Let's stop right there. You're saying he told her hair looked like goats? Understand that idioms change over time. And to a country that had a lot of its commerce having to do with being shepherds, can you imagine the beauty the shepherd would have of seeing those goats come over the hill, coming down the side of the hill with their long hair, if it's not a short-haired goat, with their long hair flowing in the breeze, that they would see that animal as being extremely pretty. And so when he compares her to a goat here, he's not saying a bad thing to her, which would be the way it would be taken today. If I were to say to Alice, "Oh, you're as beautiful as a goat," she would not like that. But back there in that day and time, he's using their idiom, and she would get it. And then he goes on to say, "Your teeth are like a flock of shorn ewes that have come up from the washing, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost its young." You see, what? Here's what he's saying. Your teeth are gorgeous. They're like the ewes. Those are the female sheep. They're like the ewes who have been cut to get the wool off of them. Then they have been washed, and now they're gorgeous and Each one has a twin, and none of them are alone. He's saying it's just this, I'm looking at this beautiful white expanse that's gorgeous to me in our day and time. And it's really a fancy way to tell her, you got all your teeth. Because he says, all of which bear twins, and not one among them has lost its young. He's saying you have all your teeth, but not just that, but they are glowing white. Now, how she accomplished that day and time, I don't know. But he's saying that she had beautiful teeth. Your lips are like a scarlet thread, and your mouth is lovely. Your cheeks are like halves of a pomegranate behind your veil. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built in rows of stone. On it hang 1,000 shields, all of them shields of warriors. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle that graze among the lilies. He sees her as beautiful, and he's using metaphors. He's comparing her to the things of his day and time that people find extremely attractive. And that's how pretty she is to him. So understand they're highly attracted to each other. Also understand, based on what he is saying to her, that she knew how to enhance her beauty. She knew how to fix her hair. She knew what to do with her teeth. She knew how to make her cheeks more attractive. She knew how to make her neck extremely attractive. And so understand that while he's seeing her beauty because he loves her so much, she knows what to do to enhance her body. You say, what do you mean? Anybody can make themselves look better if they start, well, I say anybody, I guess there could be exceptions. Most everybody can make themselves more attractive if they know what to highlight and what not to highlight, what to bring to your attention and what to kind of hide from your attention. And so she's doing this. This woman knows how to appeal to his eyes. She knows how to appeal to his vision. And men tend to be vision-oriented. And so she's appealing to that. She knows what appeals to a man. But apparently, she's also vision-oriented, and some women are more vision-oriented than others. And so in chapter 2, we're skipping back now. In chapter 2, starting in verse 14, and then we're going to look at verses 16 and 17. Here's what she says to him. Let me see your face. Let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. My beloved is mine, and I am his. He grazes among the lilies until the day breathes and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved. Be like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. Now, she just turned this conversation sexual. Oh, she tells him she loves to see his face. But notice now, she's also saying, you know how to appeal to my ears. The sound of your voice. It's sweet. Guys, understand something here, and it really has to do with life in general, but it's also very specifically involved in sex, particularly in attraction. When you speak beautifully to a woman, you become more attractive. I run into guys all the time that think, no, the way to excite my wife is we're going to talk with these dirty words when we're having sex and say all these things like that because that's going to turn her on. Well, maybe there's a possibility that can happen, or maybe she's just pretending to be turned on because she thinks that turns you on. But there is no doubt that when you speak beautifully about women, why do you think women love poetry written about them, poetry cited to them? The sweeter that your language is to them, the more attractive you become. And then when she says, my beloved is mine, I'm his, he grazes among the lilies. Oh, we're about to come back to that in a few minutes. That's really about sex. Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, turn, my beloved. Be like a gazelle or a young stag on cleft mountains. You sing, Dr. Beamer, you're saying those things are sexual? We're going to find them again in the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon. And as we do, I think you're going to see that they're in a sexual context. Now, you can always disagree. You can also say that, hey, I think you're misinterpreting this altogether. But if I were you, I'd recommend you pay attention, because even if I happen to get one of these verses wrong in my interpretation, the things I'm teaching you from the Song of Songs can lead to much greater sex in your marriage. So, let's go to chapter 4 again. You say, man, you're flipping us around. Let's go to chapter 4 again, and let's see what he says here that's actually going back to what she just said in chapter 2. So in chapter 4, verse 6, he says, until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will go away to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. Now, some of the other translations read that a little differently. Some of them say, until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of incense or frankincense, and don't really use the word away there like he's going someplace else. Now, you say you think those are sexual things. Let's think about it this way. Which part of the female anatomy is most fragrant? Now, don't think in vulgar terms here. Don't think in gross terms here. But which part of the female anatomy of its own? We're not talking about they have been covered with perfume or something. Which part of the female anatomy on its own is most fragrant? And at the same time would involve the concept of a mountain. You say, what do you mean? Well, I'm going to describe a little bit here about female anatomy. Now, I'm not going to show you a drawing or a picture of it because I don't want to offend anybody, but I'm going to describe it. You notice that when you come to the female vulva, now, the vulva is everything that's outside when you're looking at the woman's genitalia. You say, no, that's the vagina. That is incorrect. The vagina is what's inside the woman. The vulva is the outside. Now, if you're looking at the vulva just above the vulva, as a matter of fact, it's actually kind of part of the vulva, but just above, you have what is called the mons pubis. Way back in the day, it was called the mons venus, but called a mons pubis. Mons, hill. It's a hill. And it definitely is. If you look at the woman, you will see there's a little mound there. There's a little hill. And that is covered, for most women, with pubic hair. And for most women, that hair is kind of coarse and curly. And you say, is there a reason for it being like that? It's a cushion. It's part of God's engineering. So that during PVI, penile vaginal intercourse, that when that's occurring and the man is entering the woman, this layer of fat, this mons pubis, that's also typically covered with this hair, this kind of springy, if you will, is providing a cushion for both the male and the female. You say, but don't some people have very fine pubic hair? Some people do. But the general purpose of this is it's for our protection when it comes to intercourse, because there's no other way we're going to make a baby if we're not inserting that penis into the vagina to get the sperm to the uterus, the fallopian tube, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you look at that, you go, okay, so what's he saying? He's saying, I'm going to go to the part of the woman that has the aroma, the fragrance. And it's a mountain. It's a hill. Now, to my way of thinking, there's only one part of the female anatomy that could be described that way. And so he's talking about the fact that he's going down to where her vulva is. He's paying particular attention to her genitalia. Now, look up just above that. He said, until the day breathes and the shadows flee. He's talking about the fact that when daylight finally comes, notice the first word, until the day comes. Until the shadows flee. I'm going to be going to that mountain of myrrh and that hill of incense. Now, I love asking audiences, what do you think it means when he says he's going to be doing it all night long? What is that telling you about Solomon? And they'll give their various ideas. And then I say, what it means is he's the king. He doesn't have to work tomorrow. No, what he's doing in this lovemaking is taking his time. It's very slow. It's very deliberate. And why does he keep coming down to the Mons Pubis? Why does he keep coming down to the mountain of myrrh, the hill of frankincense? Because that's where the clitoris is located, just below that Mons. And it is the seat of female pleasure. It is the only organ in a human body. And it's in the females, it's not in the males. It's the only organ in the human body that exists for one reason and one reason only. And that's to give pleasure. The male penis can give pleasure, but it has a couple of other roles that it fulfills as well. This clitoris that's inside the woman, and a little bit of it outside the woman, it has only the purpose of giving pleasure. Now, because of the fact that I've taught human sexuality so many years at university level, at Lipscomb University, and because of the fact that I studied a lot of sexuality as I was getting about human sexuality I studied as I was getting my PhD at the University of Sydney, let me just give you a little biology here that I think is significant and important. The clitoris itself is about 4.5 to 5 inches long. The part that protrudes out, that's just below the Mons Pubis, and typically it's not that long. Sometimes it can be. Sometimes it can be long enough that it looks like a micro penis, that it's like, wow, that's a pretty big clitoris. But that's not anything wrong if it's like that, but most of it typically is inside and not much outside. Now, when it becomes swollen, because the woman gets aroused, and it gets bigger because it's swollen, it's a little further out, and that's where she can get all kinds of pleasure as long as that is stimulated in some fashion. Now, the rest of it is behind. It actually goes down either side of the vagina. Remember, the vagina is on the inside. And as it goes down, those are called crura. Those are the legs, if you will, of the clitoris. And they're right behind the labia majora. Those are the outer lips, the large lips, the big lips of the vulva. And then right behind that, of course, you understand that just inside the large lips are smaller lips, the labia minora. And those are right there at the very interest, the introitus of that vagina. But these crura going behind those two big lips there, that's so that when intercourse takes place, if indeed the thrusting from the male is moving those lips, then it's giving some stimulation to the crura of the clitoris. Now, they are not as sensitive because they're embedded in flesh. They're behind things as the part of the clitoris that actually protrudes. But it also has a protective cover there, the clitoris that protrudes. And it may be that if a woman is not aroused, the clitoris may be completely under that little prepuce so that you can't see it. And it's like, well, I can see the prepuce, so I know where it is, but I don't see the end of the clitoris itself. As she becomes aroused, as she becomes excited, that prepuce moves up, uncovering the clitoris so it can be more directly stimulated. And as it's being stimulated, it can actually get to the point where it becomes overstimulated. And when it becomes overstimulated, it kind of goes back a little bit. The prepuce covers it again. You say, well, is it still being stimulated even though covered? Mm-hmm. but not as much as when it's uncovered. And you said, then why would the clitoris do that? It's because the woman at that point is becoming overstimulated and needs to have a little bit of protection against all that sensation. Now, all of that occurs right under the mons pubis. If Solomon says, that's where I'm going all night long, I'm going to be paying attention to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of incense, or frankincense, it says in this translation. Basically, what he's saying is, I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to that because that's what's going to give her the most pleasure. Now, you might say, well, okay, then probably he's just doing that through intercourse, and that's how it's working. The problem with that idea is that about half, at least in America, about half of the women in America cannot reach orgasm just by PVI, penile vaginal intercourse, because the stimulation of the clitoris is not enough. Now, it's not because there's something wrong with her. It's not because there's something wrong with him. It just means for whatever reason, the way that he shaped, the way she shaped, and neither one of them have a problem here. It's just that introduction, that going into her is not getting enough stimulation to the clitoris. And so the man can have an orgasm like that because his penis is being stimulated, particularly the head of the penis deep inside the vagina, but the woman's not getting enough pressure or enough friction on that clitoris, and therefore she doesn't orgasm. And so it could be that Solomon's wife here had such a sensitive clitoris and they were shaped in such a way. It could just be talking about intercourse, but I doubt it seriously. Because if you genuinely want to make sure that the woman is going to have an orgasm, then paying direct attention to that clitoris can make a difference. Either digitally, that means with fingers, or it could be, of course, orally, that means with the mouth, and that it could be stimulated there. Now, that then would imply, at least, oral sex. So let me go to chapter 4, verse 15. Chapter 4, verse 15, if you're still using your Bible and trying to keep up with me. And this session's almost done. I'm going to have to put some of it into the next. But look what happens. He's describing her as they're making love to each other. And in verse 15, here's what he says to her. You are a garden fountain, a well of living water, and flowing streams from Lebanon. So he's describing something about her body here. He said, this is what you're like right now. Notice he did not use cruel. He did not use slang. He did not use degrading language. Women have enough problem believing that they're truly attractive. I have heard, and I think this is probably true, that even the most beautiful woman on the planet has to be constantly reminded of her beauty. You say, what does that mean? It means that women so often compare themselves to other women, and when they do, they come out second best. And so to use vulgar language, telling her that the fragrance is something that's offensive by comparing it, well, you know what I'm talking about here. I don't want to go into that language. Or to say anything about the fact that she's now highly lubricated in a way that would embarrass her that she's highly lubricated. This man knew how to make love to her ears. Remember, she said that he had a sweet voice. Sweet voice. What does that mean? He says sweet things. And so now that he refers to her being very aroused, which is being indicated by her lubrication, look how beautiful. Look what the language. Garden fountain, a well of living water, flowing streams from Lebanon. He led her to feel good about the level of arousal. Now, if she's that aroused, you can imagine that Solomon's been doing a pretty good job as a lover. But look what she says to him when he tells her how lubricated she is in this beautiful, beautiful language, poetic language even, making her feel even better about herself. Look what she says to him, awake, O north wind, and come, O south wind. Blow upon my garden. Let its spices flow. Let my beloved come to his garden and eat its choicest fruits. So do you see that? Blow on my garden, let the spices flow. Spices? What spices? Well, I've already talked about that. The myrrh, the frankincense, the aromas, the fragrances that part of her body puts out. And she says, come down to that part of my body and blow on that garden so that those spices flow, so that the fragrance spreads. And then let my lover come into his garden and eat his choicest fruits. Now, I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to kind of end with this. But I do want to show you how he replied to what she just said. Do you know what she said? She said, okay, come into my garden, make the spices flow, eat its choicest fruits. And what does he say in direct reply? It's in the next chapter, chapter 5, verse 1. It's the very next thing he says. He says, I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh with my spice. I ate my honeycomb with my honey. I drank my wine with my milk. You say, well, Dr. Bean, don't you think he could just be talking about the fact that he likes to eat? And he's, sure. But in the direct context where she just said, north wind, south wind, come and blow on my garden. Let my beloved come to his garden and taste its choice fruit. And so she calls it his. And so when he talked about it in chapter 5, he calls it his too. I came to my garden, my sister, my bride. I gathered my myrrh with my spice. All of these words are my garden. You're my bride. It's my myrrh. In other words, that aroma there. It's my spice, the frankincense and that kind of stuff. I ate my honeycomb with my honey. It's my honey. It is sweet to me. I drank my wine with my milk. In other words, everything that was there as she was a flowing stream from Lebanon. It was his. And he took full advantage of it. Well, I'm almost out of time, but I've got to take a few extra minutes so I can finish this Song of Songs. It won't take long. So over in chapter 8, verse 14 of the Song of Songs, she starts telling him what to do. She says, make haste, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices. When I'm talking to audiences, I'll pause there and say, what do you think she just told that old boy to do? She's directing him what he wants her, or she's directing him on what she wants him to do next. Now, based on everything we've looked at, the mountains of spices, unless I am just totally off base, he's talking about the vulva. He's talking about the area where the vagina is, etc. And so basically what she's saying here, unless I'm totally misinterpreting, she says, it's time for you to enter me. But look, she's building up his ego just like he's been building up her ego. He keeps telling her how pretty she is, and everything about her body is gorgeous and wonderful and pleasing. Nothing negative. Nothing cruel, nothing vulgar. And so when she says to him, a gazelle, a young stag, she's building up his ego as well. And she's saying, it's time for you to come into me, to be the stag. When I'm doing this in public, I'll ask the audience right here, gentlemen, raise your hand if you feel the following. Don't do it just to raise your hand because other guys might. I really want to know what you think. How many of you guys would find it erotic if your wife told you what she wanted you to do next to her as you're making love? Nearly every hand of every male in every audience goes up. Did you notice how she directed them all the way through? Come into my gardens. Taste this choice fruit. Now be the stag on the spice-laden mountains. She keeps telling him what to do. You said, does that mean she's dominant, that she's ruling over him, that she's the person that has all the rights? No, she's guiding him to give her the most pleasure possible. And at the same time, she's making love to his ears. We've already read that she's been making love to his sense of smell. We've already read she's been making love to his vision, his sense of sight. We've already read that she's been giving direction to his sense of taste. And so with the vision, taste, touch, all five senses, she's guiding him the whole time. Plus she herself, knowing how important the five senses are, has already dressed in such a way as to be evocative to him. Solomon's sex, in my estimation, takes a while. It's not something you do in a hurry. And that Solomon's sex, when done properly, is something that occurs when you really want to do everything you can to simulate your partner to the best, including telling him or her what you want to happen. And in this context, enjoying each other. So, I need to talk about something else, but I don't have time here. I'll start it with the next section. I want to talk about the limit. I'm sorry, that's the wrong word. I want to talk about the intensity of the love they felt for each other. It's something that we call limerence, and I think there are absolutely signs of limerence in this Song of Songs, Song of Solomon. But I'm also going to talk about how that sex can still be exciting after that, after the initial thrill. Because you see, in sexuality, we talk about a thing called sexual boredom. It's sexual habituation. In other words, after a couple of years, there's nothing new to see and nothing new to do, and sex can just get boring. I'm going to show you how that they were in limerence when all this was happening, which intensified the sex, but I'm going to show you ways then how you can keep that excitement. Maybe not to the exact same level, but keep great excitement and fulfillment as long as you're married. But that's in the next episode of the Dr. Joe Show. In the meantime, open your Bible.